Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So in this one here, I want to talk about the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 and ask the question of who the cameo is actually going to be in that season. Because so far in every spinoff, we've had a cameo, right? In Dead City, we had Simon show up. And then in Daryl Dixon, I mean, I guess it was a cameo then. Looking at it now, it's not necessarily a cameo anymore because Carol's actually, she's a part of the show and whatnot. But back then, she actually did show up. It was a big surprise. So that was a big moment, right? And then the ones who live, obviously Gabriel shows up in episode 5 as well, and all cameos happened, I believe it was all in episode 5. Maybe the Simon one happened in 4, or I think it was in episode 5, I can't remember. But anyways, because of that, I really do believe that, going forward in every single season, we probably will get a cameo of some sort. So I feel like it just makes a lot of sense to do that because you have so many characters out there that you can really bring any of those characters back, to the Walking Dead universe and tell a really cool story with them, and I think fans would get really excited about it, right? So that's why I want to talk about the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 and talk about, whether or not Andrew Lincoln could actually be a cameo in this season, but I also want to focus on other characters as well that could show up here in this season here. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. Comic-Con is in less than a month now. I think the event is starting the 24th, 25th, or maybe 26th or something like that of July. So we're just under a month. It's probably 3.5 weeks away now at this point. And I imagine starting next week, at some point, maybe it's Monday or whenever, there's going to be official details that drop regarding the Walking Dead's appearance at Comic-Con. There's probably gonna be a panel announcement, times, and all of that kind of stuff, the cast that's showing up and whatnot. It might be next week, or it could be the week after. That's sort of what I'm expecting it. Anytime in the next 2 weeks for sure, we're gonna get a bunch of details on what's happening with everything. So the latest news obviously is that Andrew Lincoln was cast in a new series, which everyone was really, really excited about. I've seen a lot of people just really happy for him and whatnot, because obviously it's exciting, and he does take on a lot of roles that are very much just it's a one story thing. He doesn't go and just do a whole, because I guess with The Walking Dead, he did that, right? He was on the show for 10 years or whatever. So it makes sense that, if he takes on any projects now, it's going to be something that, you film for a couple months and then you're done. He just wants to do a bunch of them. And that's why I feel with the Rick Grimes character right now, it makes sense to do something like that. It makes sense to do a series like The Ones Who Live, take a couple of years off, and then come back and do another series kind of thing. Whenever the story is great. If the story is good and all that, then come back to do that kind of thing, right? It makes so much sense to me. It really does. But I want to talk about whether or not Andrew Lincoln could actually show up in a cameo scene in this new series here, because there is going to be a cameo, I'm assuming. There has to be some sort of, appearance from some character in the Walking Dead universe, and there's a lot of characters that could show up. There really is a lot of characters that could show up. When I look at the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 and I think, which character could show up, I just think about what the season's going to be about, and the season's going to be about Carol. So I feel like it's going to be a connection to Carol, because with Daryl, I mean, maybe you could have a Merle flashback scene, but again, I feel like if that's going to happen, you would have to have a really important story there. And I do think we're going to see a bunch of older characters come back in flashback scenes or hallucination scenes, or just whatever, at some point in the future. I do believe we will see Michael Rooker back in The Walking Dead, but I just feel like it's not going to be a random scene in episode 5 of season 2 or something like that. It's going to be the end of Daryl's story, where Michael Rooker can actually be a part of a really, good story here. And it's the final moments of Daryl's story, in which there's a flashback scene, or maybe it's a hallucination scene where Daryl's talking with Merle again. And it's just it's a fun moment to sort of close out Daryl's story. I could totally see that happening, because they've done that with Rick Grimes and a lot of other characters, right? So in terms of characters that make sense for the story, I think Rick Grimes does make sense in terms of a flashback with Carol, and it would just be it wouldn't necessarily be a flashback. I mean, I guess it would be. That's the thing. You got to think of that actual storyline, right? Because Carol is going to be telling Daryl that Rick has survived, that Rick is back in Alexandria. At least I'm assuming so. But we're all assuming that that's what Carol meant by, who came back, was that it was Rick. So if that was who came back and Carol knows that, then I feel like, well, I mean, I guess the question would be like, when does Daryl find out, right? Like if Daryl finds out in episode 5, I mean, the question of like, well, why did it take so long for Carol to tell him, right? Which I think there's just going to be things that happen that maybe she can't tell him right away, because that always happens in like all TV shows. Like you gotta wait for a certain moment, right? Like they want to always like build it up and make it a big reveal. And you know, the Ones Who Live, Michonne didn't tell Rick about RJ for so long, right? Until episode 4. You'd figure that she would say something right away, but she was just like, no, I want to wait for like the right moment, right? So I feel like it could be the same thing here, basically, as Carol's like, you know, maybe they're in a situation where she can't say anything right away. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But my point is, that's a scene I want to see. I want to see Carol with Rick. And I think if that's, you know, an important part of like an episode where she has to tell Daryl that, seeing a flashback with Andrew Lincoln makes a lot of sense, right? And again, it's just one scene. It's one scene with Carol. And when I look at the future, I also don't see Rick Grimes really being in like any of these spin-offs. And I feel like if you do a reunion at some point in the future, you're not going to show every character reuniting with Rick, right? Like as much as I want that, you're not going to see everyone's reaction to reuniting with him, because I just feel like they don't really show that a lot lately. They're going to focus more on like Daryl specifically kind of thing, right? And yeah, so getting scenes like this, I think would be really awesome. I think it would just be so cool to see Carol and Rick just kind of talking, and maybe it's a whatever scene, maybe it connects with Daryl and whatnot, and that's why Carol left to go and find Rick, because Carol was like, well, you know, I was just doing this, whatever, but then Rick came back and he was wondering where you were, and so I was like, well, I have to go and find you kind of thing, and so maybe that's why Carol's out there. I'm not entirely sure. Like, again, I feel like this could happen, but it's something that we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, right? In terms of like another cameo that could happen, I think Ed and Sophia makes a lot of sense. Like, it couldn't be Sophia, like the actress who played Sophia, like back then, obviously. They would have to recast her, and I'm guessing that it's not going to be around that same time frame anyways. It's probably going to be like a couple of years beforehand, and maybe just show, you know, what Carol and Ed's relationship was like back then, you know, and just some of the, you know, struggling that she went through. I think that makes the most sense there, because I think that would tie into a lot of maybe why Carol's trying to find Daryl and all of that. Besides them, I'm trying to think of other characters. Like, honestly, it would just have to be, like, I don't even know who you would choose, because there's so many characters that could show up, but I don't know if they're actually ever really going to show up. Like, it's hard to say, because with Gabriel, that felt very random. Like, at first it felt random, but then all of a sudden you see the connection with Jadis and you're like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? So I don't know who they're going to choose here, but you know, if they were to do a cameo and they were to write the scene and all that, to me, it makes a lot of sense that it would be more focused on Carol's story. And so Andrew Lincoln showing up would be really cool. Again, it's just one of those things where I feel like it would be so much. Like, it would be such a big deal for him to show up, right, in The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. But you got to remember, too, like, he was in Fear the Walking Dead season 4, episode 1, right? It was a very short scene, but he was there for Morgan's first episode of Fear the Walking Dead, and, you know, him being on that show for the remainder of that show. So it, like, he would do things like that, I think, right? Like, I think he would go on Daryl Dixon to be there for a part of Carol's story if it's really crucial to the scene. It makes a lot of sense, and timing wise it makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're filming in France, you know, they're definitely closer to where Andrew Lincoln is. I think that it makes some sense, but I also think having an Ed and Sophia scene would be something that would be really just kind of cool and interesting to see for Carol, because we haven't really seen anything of her backstory before. Like we know of Ed, we know of Sophia, and we know sort of, you know, what it was like there in season 1, but not a lot of like flashbacks. And also I would say the same thing with Daryl as well. Not a lot of flashbacks with Daryl to like when he was younger and just like before the apocalypse, what life was like. Like, we kind of understand what it was like, but we haven't seen anything yet, right? Like, The Walking Dead never really went back to telling stories there. And I think with these spin-offs, that's kind of what they've been doing. Like, if you look at Rick Grimes, they went into that quite a bit, right? Like, they actually told stories from when he was a kid, and the whole story with like his father and all that, and the house or the farm, you know, being set on fire and whatnot. So they are exploring more of the characters' backstories here, which I think is smart. Like, on The Walking Dead, it's kind of insane to think that they just never really did that. Like, with some characters they did, I guess. Like, with Michonne, there was kind of a flashback a little bit to before the apocalypse happened, though it was kind of a dream, but you saw a little bit of what her life was like. I'm trying to think of other characters where we actually got like flashbacks. Like, there wasn't really a lot, and I feel like it's because back then doing a flashback would just be doing it for the sake of doing a flashback, I guess, which is kind of the point now. But you know, flashbacks are fun. Like, getting, you know, more backstory on certain characters is a lot of fun. Like, fans do like to see that. you just have to make it make sense. You have to make it, worthwhile of a story to tell. And so just make it matter to, the current story, and then it'll work. So I think that's what they're doing now. And so that's why I'm excited to see, what this cameo is going to be. And as of right now, it's really, I do think it's going to be between like Andrew Lincoln and then like Ed and Sophia. There might be some characters that I'm not really thinking about as of right now, but definitely let me know down below your thoughts. Who do you think will show up in The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2? Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.